So if you're an energy user, what do you want? You want clean, reliable, affordable power. Like that's what you want. You want energy that is not going to get more expensive, that is delivered to you reliably, and I think it's pretty clear you want energy that's clean, that's not creating issues for your air or water or your children's future or whatever it might be.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest River Partners. Look, whether it's the abundant, affordable hydropower we're always touting here, or some of those new energy technologies we've been covering recently on the pod, one thing is for certain. Our energy resources are only as good as the grid they're connected to. What do I mean? Well, if you've got a great big dam churning out thousands of megawatts of power, but you can't reliably deliver that energy to the next town over, you're not doing a whole lot of good, are you? Well, as of now, we've got a pretty solid grid here in the Northwest, but as we modernize and electrify just about everything else in our lives, the same needs to be done for the grid. How we move the grid forward into the future is exactly what Bryce, Yonker and Grid Forward are all about. So naturally, we had to get him on DAM to get up to speed on all things grid modernization.
Recording in progress.
All right, we are live and we got everything working here. So Bryce, thanks for coming on DAM this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
Absolutely. So the first thing I think would be important to get out of the way is what does Grid Forward do, and what do you do there?
Yep, Grid Forward, we're an industry trade organization. We work with utilities, tech companies, national labs, investors, nonprofits, the wide ecosystem of stakeholders that are moving the grid forward. So we're trying to help deploy the advanced toolkit of technologies that the system really needs and get those out in the marketplace and in use so that they can have their benefit across the region. So we're primarily working in the western part of the US and Canada. So we're a bit of a macro regional focused organization, and I head it. So I'm a CEO, executive director. So some days working on policy, some days working on some deployments, some days doing initiatives or agendas for meetings. Never a dull moment as far as what's going on around here.
I think we can relate. It sounds very, very familiar to our organization as far as, there's only so many of us and there's a lot of different ground to cover. So there's always something going on.
Yep.
So let me ask you too, as far as when you say the stakeholders that are moving the grid forward, who would that be exactly? I mean, are we talking about utilities, or are we talking about maybe the people that are building the technology that's being used to move the grid forward? I mean, who exactly is moving the grid forward?
Yeah, so the bilateral parties that we work most closely with are the distribution electric grid operators, the utilities, who are putting new solutions onto their system, and the tech companies that are providing them those capabilities. So that might be a set of analytic solutions. I would say earlier in the day, smart grid might have been somewhat synonymous with smart meters. And so that's a piece of it. There's various ways that we're getting better visibility onto the system. So lots of sensoring, monitoring, controls, analytics packages that are going in. So we have better real time is maybe an aggressive word, but we have better visibility as to what's going on at any one location on our system at any period of time. There's a lot of advanced functionalities that stakeholders are trying to do to bring on, to add them. Maybe a wide way of saying that would be add flexibility to the system. So you might be deploying demand side management programs, or maybe getting into, I hate the acronyms, we might be deploying DERM solutions and integrating some distributed resources on your system in some sort of a coordinated fashion. Lots of new types of demand are coming on energy systems. So the way that providers are keeping up with that can drive automation and drive advanced functionality. So we just did a summit on electric vehicles and kind of what's all entailed for grid operators to keep up with that. So certainly that's not everything, but that's kind of a smattering of a few of the areas that are keeping people really busy and active right now. To do those sorts of advanced capabilities, those stakeholders can't do it in a vacuum, right? So they can't deploy these really advanced, new, somewhat foundationally different ways of running their system without leveraging national labs, without leveraging thought leadership and various nonprofit, forward-thinking leaders. There's sometimes outside funding that's required, so it's not just ratepayer capital coming to the table. So you got investors getting involved in this transition. So it's a big tent for us. But directly to your question, when we talk about the grid modernizing, mostly we think about that in context to utilities deploying solutions. Now, can the grid modernize because customers are doing stuff themselves, whether that's a homeowner or a business or an industrial facility? Of course, absolutely, that's happening as well. So then the utility kind of comes in on the back end and figures out how to deal with that. But yes, mostly we're talking with utilities on how they're advancing their systems.
Gotcha. And I appreciate that explanation. Not only for myself trying to learn all about this today, but also for everyone listening at home who may know even less in terms of kind of what the full picture looks like in terms of energy and grid, and understanding all the different players in that. Let me ask you. So how does someone kind of end up in the role that you're in now, and working on the things you are? I mean, what kind of background do you have that's led you to being in the position you're at today?
Yeah. So from an education standpoint, I have degrees in business, an MBA, and underscores in marketing. And I would say I'm doing those things. Part of it was just the sheer determination to want to do this. So back in the day, if you will, when I was starting my career, I was working with just the general ecosystem of technology companies and seeing software being deployed across all sorts of verticals. And that's where I got a real appreciation, fascination, and passion for how advanced technology was going to make a difference in the energy space, and how modernizing our grid was going to be an important thing to do to keep up with the demands, and make sure that we're taking care of the people and the environment that's necessary to do that. So I would say I just became determined to have that impact, and found a way into this. So previous to running Grid Forward, I worked at a research and advisory shop, and so we were providing a lot of guidance and reports and information to industry stakeholders. And then I departed that day job, that full-time job, to start my own consultancy and really gear up what it was going to take to scale. At the time, we changed the name of Smart Grid Oregon to Smart Grid Northwest. So it's been a journey scaling this organization. I've kind of been there since at the beginning, and it's been really exciting to see about when you bring a group of interested people together, what sort of impact you can have. And Grid Forward is really making a big impact these days.
Certainly. And Kurt was telling me about kind of the Smart Grid Oregon to Smart Grid Northwest transformation, and now being Grid Forward. What was kind of the driver for those changes? I mean, I would assume when you talk about going from Oregon to Northwest, that's an expansion. But kind of tell me like how it's evolved and grown over these years.
Yeah, I think the evolution in the first step, well, all the steps were a reflection of what we were currently doing with the organization. So it was to right align the impact of the organization with kind of what we were already delivering on. So in the Smart Grid Oregon days, it was very board led. I was on that initial board. There really wasn't any team leadership, management. We hadn't committed to any significant gatherings. It takes a lot to put on, conferences and the like. So we brought me on to, take on the helm of the role, bring some team behind, making the organization professionalized. We put our stake in the sand with starting to put some conferences on, and really have those thought leadership convenings together. And Oregon to Northwest was a pretty natural evolution. I mean, we were already engaging with stakeholders in Washington and PNL and the other state parts of the Pacific Northwest. when we transitioned from Smart Grid Northwest to Grid Forward, we again already had a lot of working relationships outside the Pacific Northwest, and so we wanted to kind of not be so geographically constricted to the Pacific Northwest. We still wanted to have a focus regionally, so that's a little bit more macro Western focus now. And at that time, and I would say still now, the term smart grid is a little bit of a confusing, somewhat contentious term. What is it? What isn't it? So we just needed to kind of part ways with that term. And we tend to more synonymously say grid modernization, which again, people can define in a lot of different ways and a lot of different formats. But it was a good time to expand the geographic focus. Our events were growing steam. Our impact was certainly getting higher. From 2019, when we changed the Grid Forward name, pretty much from day one, we were at a front seat of, I know we're going to talk about this a lot today, impacting the federal policy that was going to be coming down for the industry across the country to help move advanced grid solutions forward. So it's been somewhat of a natural evolution as the reach of the organization has expanded. We've got now about 150 members. So those are different stakeholders across this ecosystem that are, many of them, pretty geographically dispersed as far as where they're based and located. And it's pretty exciting. I mean, as far as what is synonymous with smart grid, or what does it look like for a grid operator to move forward their modernization, that toolkit is dramatically advanced in the last decade from when we started. So now there's a lot of solutions that places are thinking about what they want to do with, and they can deploy it at a very large scale if they're ready to. So,
Well, and you really hit on kind of the thing I wanted to get to next, which is trying to, I guess, define, and it might not be easy to do, certainly, but trying to kind of define or maybe draw a comparison between a smart grid and a traditional electric grid, and kind of what the, what it means to modernize, to make these transitions, and kind of, change the way that the grid works. I think a lot of people understand on a very basic level, you've got your power lines that come into your house, you've got a meter, and then, there's electricity run through the building or whatever. But, the grid is obviously much more advanced than that.
So it's not exactly analog to digital, but that's one way to think about it. We had a system that was run very electromechanically and now can be operated in a much more digital, real-time nature. So whether that's metering, just changing a meter read from once a month to every few seconds, or more current if you're using some of the latest deployments. So the transition to digitizing and digitalizing the grid is a key aspect of modernizing it, but is not going to be the only way to think about how you run a modern grid. I talked about visibility. So having the understanding of what is going on across the system, it's amazing. This massive industrial process that we have that delivers us on-demand services for so many things that are powered by electricity, how much visibility we still do not have on it at this time. So that's a massive, that situational awareness and real-time understanding of what's going on is a massive part of modernizing an energy grid. The advanced functionality and capabilities that an operator would do in a modern grid, we would categorize in this area. So I mentioned like a distributed energy resource management system. So in many ways, the energy system is becoming more dispersed. So the grid of the past had a few assets that were very large in size and stepped down through transmission and distribution into the end load. Well, now you've got the ability to add generating assets at the edge, in the middle, anywhere across the distribution system. So using those toolkits in a significant fashion would be a modern way of running a grid. So those are a couple of the kind of key examples. I'm not looking at my cheat sheet of our talking points of how we define a modern grid. But just thinking about it, as I mentioned that again, I think a couple really other important aspects are related to kind of the voice of the customer. The end user is a pretty active, they're much less of a passive role in the energy system the way they used to be historically. So we don't use the term prosumer a whole lot, but you have an energy user that has interest, has resources, whether it's an electric vehicle that they might be plugging into their garage, or a solar system, or certainly a battery system that they might be putting in. These can be grid assets. So the interest and the demands of the customer are really driving operators to run their systems in a more dynamic fashion. So those would be a couple of the ways that kind of what a modern grid looks like now for the operator. And I can keep going. So that's where it gets just complicated, is that there's a lot of things simultaneously coming at an operator kind of all at the same time. And depending where you're at with the maturity of deploying these solutions, it can be somewhat overwhelming. So some places need to pick and choose their battles. They'll look at their system and be like, all right, right now we need to put in smart meters, or wow, we need some additional flexibility. We need to go figure out how we're going to deploy storage, or do a smart thermostat program with our customers and get a demand side flexibility. Or wow, we are looking like some of our distribution assets are really near the end of their life, and we haven't planned for those investment cycles yet. Can we defer those by doing some smart managing of our system? Or can we install some sensors to give us some predictive analytics on, yep, this one's about to go out. We better make an investment in that. So there's a lot of areas that you can modernize your system. And unless you're some of the more sophisticated, advanced, and typically larger operators, it's hard to kind of do those all at the same time, because it's a heavy lift for those entities.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, and it's also, it's something that I know we experience here often, which is, just looking at the needs of our individual members. Most of them being public power utilities. It varies so much from one utility to the next. I mean, the people they're serving, the way the communities are laid out. I was just doing the podcast not too long ago with Consumers Power down in Oregon, and we were talking about wildfire and how it affected them. And one of the things they were talking about is, like, we've got more people building large homes in extremely rural areas than we had before. And so it sort of changes even how they need to operate as far as getting power out to places that they never had to really worry about too much as far as serving in the past.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
Consumers is a
just so
great
varied.
organization. And taking the grid modernization topic to them and to wildfire, the way they decide to run their system, some of those would be not necessarily modern ways of running your grid, right? Just wrapping conductor. It's a pretty basic way to prevent ignition, or burying a line, right? Undergrounding lines. These are or just having a more proactive vegetation management system. So these are pretty basic ways of preventing, say, a wildfire risk, or hardening your system to that threat. But there are some modern tools that can be used, and they are using them, right? They've got a drone program there that's flying out and surveilling their lines, and I think they're using LiDAR. I don't know what sort of imagery solution they have, but they can fly the drone over the lines and identify, here's an issue, let's go fix it. So they can pinpoint a location that they need to go address. There's a company, I don't know if they're doing this. There's a number of companies that do advanced monitoring solutions, so that we may have an issue here that's going to be something that could, we might have some contact of some vegetation on our line here because we're sensing some vibrations on that. We actually have a couple, we'll talk about this later, but we have a couple submissions in for federal funding to deploy a portfolio of advanced solutions in the region to do just that, to mitigate wildfire risk, because it's a pretty serious issue here in the region.
Certainly, and I mean, I think right now, even just since that podcast came out, there's been wildfires here in the Northwest, but now we're seeing the situation in Hawaii. So, it's on people's minds for sure. I think it's becoming increasingly relevant, unfortunately, and it's something that I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, it's a challenge to our grid.
Yeah, I feel a lot for the folks in Hawaii. It's just a terrible situation. I don't know how much grid impact there is in that scenario. I know it's still unfolding, But we've talked with some of our friends up in Alberta, where last I heard 30 million acres was burning up in northern Alberta. And it's pretty remote territory up there. So there's some utilities that serve a little bit more of a very rural community up there, and they're trying to figure out what they can do. But yeah, here in the West, wildfires is very much at the top of mind of grid operators, because those lines run through heavily vegetated areas. And so if they themselves aren't potentially contributing to issues, which they can, certainly they're directly impacted as those fires burn through those areas.
Definitely. And so, let me ask you, as far as maybe the utilities, the operators, the people that are, on sort of that side of the grid, I think the advantages to modernization make total sense. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. But if you're, let's say, just the average person living in a suburban home or something like that, I mean, what would be the advantage for you, and why might you want your utility to look into modernizing the grid?
So if you're an energy user, what do you want? You want clean, reliable, affordable power. Like, that's what you want. You want energy that is not getting more expensive, that is delivered to you reliably. And I think it's pretty clear across, certainly in the West, but across the world, you want energy that's clean, that's not, creating issues for your, air or water or your children's future or whatever it might be. So delivering that right now increasingly requires delivering a modern system. So we can touch on, any one of them, but maybe we'll take energy affordability, for example. So all of these outcomes, these if you put them in a Venn diagram, they have overlapping implications. So there are some trade-offs, right? So if you want affordable energy and reliable energy, these things aren't one and the same, right? You have to take these considerations into factor. So I mean, basically, at the end of the day, you've got to create a business case for these advanced functionalities and make sure that the investments are worth taking. So if you're we could, I'm not going to take undergrounding because I wouldn't consider it maybe a modern grid solution, a very expensive solution, but like sensors, for example, if you're giving real-time sensoring, very low cost solution, right? These aren't high investment dollars that can have very significant impacts, right? If you're censoring a system and you now know this major transformer is going to go out, you're now alleviating what would have been a huge disruption for your power and allowing that operator to proactively invest in it. Now they're going to spend dollars to invest in it, so it's increasing your reliability at a cost, right? So that could be an example there. I mean, wildfire mitigation, right? So what's the cost of avoided catastrophic impacts on communities? I mean, that's a huge impact. So you definitely, if you're a grid operator, want to minimize any possibility that you're, causing these ignitions, right? So investing in that, I think people will say that's a very smart investment, even if that has a little bit of upward price, to not have catastrophic wildfires coming through our community. So I think those would tend to be costs that consumers would probably, if they knew they were bearing them, happily bear, because they would be pretty incremental costs. And then another aspect of kind of running a modern grid definitely gets at the downward pressure of price. So let's take, for example, a demand side management program. What would a grid operator build instead of that? They would build like a peaker plant, right? So instead of spending $500 million on a next incremental significant project to meet that demand, start out and incrementally meet that demand by building out tens of megawatts of flexible load from your customer, right? So, it's kind of an evolution of energy efficiency, which would clearly be the least cost resource and help save customers money. Well, if you're deploying a demand side management program and using the load that flexibility that's already baked into your customer base and incentivizing them, so you're giving them payments for that, for using their thermostat a couple times a year, you're putting downward pressure on what potentially could be upward rates. So there are some functionalities that are a little bit more nuanced, which I probably just won't get into here because it's really sophisticated functionality on the grid and would be maybe a couple steps removed for a customer to understand the benefit for it. But at the end of the day, you just got to create that business case, right? Show and document why that advanced functionality is going to be beneficial for the end customer. Because at the end of the day, all these operators, that's who they serve, right? That's what's most important, is delivering that cost affordable, clean, and reliable energy to that customer. So modernization in many cases really enables that to come to fruition.
Certainly, and I always try and emphasize to people that these people, in terms of the people behind the utilities, the people operating the grid, they're not going to do these things if there is no benefit. I mean, it's just kind of it really doesn't make sense.
If they're regulated, of course they have to. I mean, in your world, that you have the boards and the advisors looking at those expenses. Maybe I'll tangent on one idea. It's wonky, but I'll tangent there nonetheless. So this broad category of non-wire solutions lives out there because the idea that building additional transmission and distribution lines is just there's no way around it. It's a costly endeavor, a cost that's going to be passed along to customers, and it's a time-intensive endeavor. I'm not going to say that we don't need it, because to get delivery of clean energy to customers across the region, we just need more transmission. So I'll put that out there to start. But if you were looking at the alternatives to building would be a much more cost-effective solution. So maybe you have a constraint, a specific part in your grid, you deploy some locational storage at that spot, you layer in a demand-side management program there, and you maybe do some other really kind of sophisticated grid management technologies that I won't get into right now. But now that portfolio of solutions is just going to lower the bar on the capital expenditure by a significant margin, like orders of magnitude. Now, it's a somewhat of a temporary fix, because eventually, potentially, demand's going to continue to go up and you're going to need to do the build option. But for now, you've saved your customers a lot of money, and you're still delivering reliable energy by providing that solution. So instead of building a significant transmission with massive substation upgrades and significant distribution infrastructure, you've placed in locationally specific storage, demand-side management programs, targeted energy efficiency programs, and you've saved everybody money, right? And eventually, hopefully, the crossing lines that you're going to hope to try to weave is lay the foundation for that build, so that when you need to do it, you've got the permitting, you've got the financing, you've got everything you need to do. You've then deployed kind of all of the solutions at the edge that you could have. You've exhausted that resource, and then now you build, because you have to, and you've also deployed all of your cost-effective solutions to their fullest extent. So.
Well, the line we always hear from utilities is like, yeah, it's, all great until, you actually go to put a transmission line in, and then no one wants it in their backyard, right? I mean, that's kind of the... Right. So, one thing I want to ask you to, just to, make sure that people can follow along here. What is a demand side program? I mean, what does that really look like? I mean, I'm sure
tough term to use. So it's deploying an energy resource for grid purposes, so for a grid operator, by leveraging assets that are on premise at the customer's site. So really this kind of concept got kicked off in earnest when there was so much automation around bringing heating and cooling of air into an era where the grid operators could send a signal and tap into that. But it's not just smart thermostats that would be a part of a demand side management program. So any resource that you can dial up or down Typically you're dialing it down because you've got a peak demand and you're trying to lower that demand. But you could ask folks to use more at a certain time if it was advantageous for the system. So demand side management program is one where grid operator sends a signal, hey, I'd love for you to ratchet down your energy use. Typically they would send a payment. Because you're going to respond, we're going to incentivize you. And then on an aggregated level, brings those resources in and uses them on the system. So that's a demand side management program. Locations that have energy markets are typically a little further ahead of others, where you've got operator signals coming from an ISO. But there's no region you can't do this at a distribution level as well, because there's value for all involved. So very key tool that we would consider kind of in at the core of, like we had described, running a modern system. Let's leverage the flexibility that's inherent in our customers to run our system better.
And I think it ties into kind of the next thing I wanted to get at, which is, one of the points you brought up in terms of the advantages of grid modernization is getting to a point where we have, reliable, and not that we don't now, but making sure that we, I guess, continue to provide reliable power. And we've heard from groups like the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, the North American Energy Reliability Corporation, that there's growing risk of sort of reliability concerns, which means blackouts, and that comes from extreme weather. It comes from growing demand when we talk about electrifying more things on sort of the electric vehicle front or the heating front and things like that. And then we have more resources coming online that are like solar and wind and things that are more intermittent, as opposed to the fossil fuels, which are obviously polluting. There's a reason we're phasing those out, but they do have a more firm form of generation. What do you see kind of as the solution addressing some of those reliability challenges in terms of specific technologies that are going to help us with modernization?
Yeah, I should dust off my testimony to the Senate. So about 2 years ago, we did some testimony on what does it look like to have expand grid reliability. I won't be able to rattle it all off the top of my head, but we've covered a lot of it today as far as increased visibility, increased use of data, and then basically respond accordingly, right? So if you know what's wrong on the system and can deal with it in kind, that's the best way to fight the issues. Because you're right. Right now, we collectively across the country are not heading in the right direction. Our energy system is becoming less reliable rather than more reliable right now. The average number of hours that a consumer faces across the country has gone up pretty significantly in the last handful of years. I imagine, I haven't looked at it in nuanced detail, largely because you've have very significant events that are impacting large regions for not short duration outages, but very long, multiple hour, even multiple day outages. Many driven by climate kind of impacts. So the answer is not knee-jerk reaction overbuild, because if we could engineer our way out of this and create a system that is nearly always up, but nobody would want that because of the cost, right? So if you're looking at trading off reliability and cost, there's just not a way to do that. You could put a microgrid in absolutely everybody's neighborhood and have redundant on-site, resources ready to go when the main grid goes down, your community microgrid comes up. Well, that's not cost effective. Now, would it be very effective to deploy a community resilience hub in some really critical locations? Yes. And maybe that has slight upward pressure, but these are places that are continually and again being impacted by long duration outages. But again, you would know that if you're looking at the data, you're finding out where your issues are. Maybe you're pulling out the impacts. Oh, that's being continually caused by vegetation contact. Well, it's been a few $1 million in underground, that part of our grid. So it's going to always be that, when it comes to reliability, it's always going to be that trade-off of affordability. And kind of the exciting thing right now is that the portfolio of solutions is kind of there, right? We can target the investments at the localized level. I think what a lot of folks are waiting for is kind of the breakthrough at the massive level, because we don't have fusion energy right now. It's not even talking about cost effective. We don't have it yet. I mean, there's scientific breakthroughs where they're net generating energy, which is really exciting, but that's still a ways out. Targeting a baseload resource like a small modular nuclear reactor is starting to become feasible, but again, not cost effective, right? We're quite a ways off delivered energy, certainly in this region, but in any region across the country right now for an SMR, a baseload resource that will be really useful for a region, and may well make sense to layer into their energy mix for a reliability standpoint. Especially if you're talking about trying to bring down some other baseload resources, but again, not necessarily cost effective one-to-one against the levelized cost of energy in that community. So that's kind of a nuanced answer. We could dive into some aspects of it if you want, but yeah, I mean, it's not an easy fix right now because the trajectory of the impacts does not look like it's slowing down. All inclinations are that it's only accelerating. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting time to figure out how to deal with this effectively.
Well, I think I think you touched on a lot of good points there, and one of the things that crossed my mind is just even the challenge of if you've found the solution, if you've found a way to implement it, all the above, right? Then it's even a matter of like, will the people of that community be on board, or are you going to get significant pushback for trying to, let's say, put in a small modular reactor somewhere, or are people going to be like, nope, keep that thing far away from me, I don't want it, I don't care about the advantages, type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of the edge solutions are a little bit less NIMBY ridden, right? If you're talking about a microgrid that's solar and storage powered, you can put that at a school or a community district and create an education curriculum around it, right? So that's not so bad. But yeah, some of the other maybe larger scale solutions, they're tough. Like even energy infrastructure itself, and I'm not even talking about wires, but like who wants a substation in their backyard, right? So yeah, it's not going to be an easy solution by any stretch of the imagination as we continue to shift the delivery of energy in our communities, and frankly as we deal with the impacts of a changing climate, right? If we had the sort of climate that was around 40 or 50 years ago with the grid we have now, we wouldn't have the outages that we have, right? So we're kind of trying to not only change the solutions but change the environment that we're working in. So
right, and I guess one of the other challenges, possibly challenge, possibly not, I guess, which is what I want to get to, is you brought up testifying, and you also brought up earlier on a little bit the federal policy side of things. I mean, what sort of federal policies right now are either maybe hurting or helping achieve some of these grid modernization goals?
I'm glad we can dive into it. It's a swimming pool we could swim in for quite a long time, so we'll take just a quick jump in. So we were really excited even before 2021. Senator Murkowski and Senator Cantwell, a number of bipartisan senators, decided that we needed to pass an energy bill. We hadn't passed one for over a decade in Congress. So the Energy Act of 2020 kind of foundationally got funding for the key research institutions across this country to get to work. And it laid a lot of the foundation for what ended up becoming the energy aspects of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so the IIJA. So for us, that was just the home run legislative package that came out of Congress in November of 2021. I mean, you're looking at about $100 billion, different ways of dividing it, but about $100 billion that goes towards helping support and modernize energy infrastructure systems across this country. A massive investment. So we were thrilled to see Congress step up and partner with states and localities and the stakeholders that are going to deploy this infrastructure across the country and say, we're here to help help on that endeavor. So the aspect of and in creating such a massive set of funds, the agency had to create new offices, right? So you got a new office of clean energy demonstrations, you got a new office that is striking partnerships with states. But for us, they created a new office called the Office of the Grid Deployment Office. So it's deploying infrastructure that's going on the grid to modernize it. And three aspects of that, a cool $14 billion, so a not insignificant amount of money, came together to really support grid resilience. So there's a really exciting unfolding 5-year program there at the Grid Deployment Office to provide money to operators to modernize their energy systems. There's one that's focused on resilience. There's one that's focused on smart grid, and there's one that's focused on really transformational investments in the way you deliver energy to your communities and rethinking and rebuilding the way that you do that. So there's more aspects to the IIJA than that, but those are some of the areas that we're really excited about. Those are in motion now. So DOE is putting solicitations out, is starting to select the companies and get the dollars out to the states. That's going to help support the investments that are needed there. But Congress didn't stop, and we were really glad that they didn't. So they kept the train rolling. The CHIPS Act has some aspects of energy, but I won't really get into that. But really, the Inflation Reduction Act is the next big one that came almost exactly a year ago. It was August of last year that the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and the way folks were generally counting that, it was a 4x on the IIJA. I mean, there's different ways of calculating it, but there's maybe about 400 billion there. The very specific focus for that is an incentivization on the tax structure. So we've had this rocky roller coaster ride of extending taxes, not extending taxes, lowering them, debating that. And so they just put it out for 10 years and put just a big portfolio of resources that get to use that incentive. And they also made sure, and applicable for your audience, that organizations that don't have a tax appetite can go leverage that benefit. So if you're a not-for-profit organization, co-op, a municipality, a nonprofit set of energy operators, you can directly access those benefits if you're going to build a community solar project or put some storage on your system to harden it. So that's really, really exciting. And Treasury just released the guidance for how they're thinking about rolling out those elements. Doesn't stop there in IRA. They just tried to find funds to deploy advanced capabilities across all host of areas. So of all agencies, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, got $10 billion, and it's only for the co-ops in this country. So that's a really significant series of funds for cooperatives who are revolutionizing the way that they deliver energy and bringing those resources to their customers. They can go partner with USDA and get those funds, and it's a loan grant combination. So if you want to, why not take the money? So you can take out the money that's a grant, and then if you don't have those funds in your community already, you can take out a really low cost loan from USDA to deploy those resources. So there's other elements. There's basically every agency that has some touch into the energy system and into bringing new solutions onto the grid is flush right now with resources to try to partner with their communities, with their stakeholders to bring those forward. It's kind of game on time right now for folks, kind of once in a generation opportunity to make these investments. And so it's really, really exciting to see the feds make that commitment. And I think your community probably knows it doesn't really matter what project you are. If you got a hydro project, there's incentives to expand that capacity and make it more efficient. If you've got an interest in a nuclear project, there's incentives to do demonstrations of advanced nuclear. If you want to deploy batteries or put in a community microgrid, or you need to update your SCADA system. You can practically almost anything you need to do to modernize your system. You can find a way to go get funds right now from the feds for that. So it's a really important time.
So I guess what I hear you saying ultimately is, yeah, it's time to act if you're in the
You're doing
if you're in the
something
mood
on
to
your
act.
system and you want to see if the federal government can play a role to partner on it. Most likely the answer is yes. And that will not be the case forever, right? These are finite resources. On the grid resilience front, there's about a 5-year runway that'll run through a couple funding cycles at DOE. There's one that's 8. The tax incentives might extend for about 10 years, so you got a little bit of time to work through those. I can't remember the duration on USDA. It might be something generally in that range as well. So as long as things don't get crazy, and it's DC, so things will get crazy. You've got a little bit of cycle to do these, but we're definitely encouraging folks. If you missed the first wave, get ready to do the second. Beyond that, we've got a federal election in DC. Who knows what's going to happen? So yeah, it's definitely a really exciting time right now.
Something else that comes to mind at the federal level, it sounds like things are pretty good, but we know within say utilities, whatever, they have kind of their portion of the grid they operate. But when we talk about the grid, we also do talk about whether it's the Northwest or the entire West Coast. I mean, there's a lot of interconnection going on there. What sort of challenges or advantages do you see at a state policy level, and how do some of the different states around here kind of either work together or maybe create challenges by passing different policies, as far as kind of making sure that these grid modernizations can happen?
Well, the proverbial state policy over the last decade, was the RPS, and so there's a lot of the jockeying for who's going the furthest, the fastest, and what does that mean for operators? I mean, you've got the CETA Act in the state of Washington that's really aggressively requiring decarbonization of resources, towards 100% clean energy mix in the state of Washington. We've got others that are maybe a little bit more hands off. Certainly, if you're looking at like an Idaho or Montana, sort of a state legislature on requiring from a generation mix how clean it looks. I would say that the rubber meets the road typically with modernizing energy systems with your regulatory bodies. It's the sort of advanced technology area that doesn't often really get legislative attention with your state legislatures. There's some exceptions, but I mean, if you get into the like really nitty gritty of it, it's almost always the PUCs that are dealing with the grid modernization related topics. So that might be they're requiring a docket for advanced distribution system planning, so that more stakeholders, including the regulator themselves, have visibility into, well, what are you doing on your distribution system itself? So that plan would then help places see, well, how are you trying to modernize it? You might have some really kind of rethinking about the regulatory regime itself. So some jurisdictions are doing things like performance-based regulation, where operators are incentivized in different ways other than the kilowatt hour sales of energy. And so really kind of rethinking the relationship between rethinking how revenue is generated at grid operators, which is a really helpful way of reframing the dialogue, and then encouraging the right kinds of modernization rather than just the most capital intensive projects that get their guaranteed rate of return over that long period of time. So yeah, the state conversations tend to get into the real nitty gritty of what regulators are probably thinking about across the country when it comes to modernization. I think you have an increasing appreciation for people of all sizes and visibility and ability to impact energy on the question you were asking earlier around reliability. We need a reliable energy system in our ever increasingly digitally reliant economies and lives. We need an energy system that's reliable. So they're asking some harder questions as far as like, what's your resilience plan? What's your wildfire mitigation plan? So those sorts of things are definitely happening at a I would say more active clip right now. and very directly relate to the sort of investments that would be required from a modernization standpoint to address them.
I definitely appreciate the explanation there, and I think that's also fairly encouraging news as well on that front. Kind of switching gears a little bit, as you know, we're a hydropower organization here, and one of the things that we have heard sometimes is that because we have hydropower, because we've got good reliability, affordability, so on and so forth, that you know as far as things like new resources or energy efficiency or whatever, maybe we don't need it because we're already kind of taken care of or whatever the case is. Do you see that there's a challenge there, or is it just like at this point, energy demand's growing so quickly that we don't need to really worry about our resources competing in terms of like hydro versus some of these new technologies?
Yeah, I kind of giggle at that a little bit. Hydro is the backbone of the supply of the generation supply in the Pacific Northwest, has been for so long, and will be, and needs to be, should be. It's a baseload resource. I mean, seasonally there's some adjustment based on precipitation and snowpack levels and the like that are becoming a little bit more precipitous. So it's baseload with an asterisk, right? But it's very incredibly cost effective. If you look at the price of delivered energy in various regions, we can very directly attribute our low cost energy to the low cost generation we have from hydro resources in this region. And it's carbon free, right? It's not emitting. I mean, there's embedded carbon in steel and in concrete, but beyond that really sophisticated carbon accounting conversation, right? It's not emitting carbon resources, so it meets the needs of what customers want that we went through earlier. So let's keep a very strong hydro resource in this region, a healthy one. And let's supplement it, right? It's not going to be, it is already not sufficient, right? So it's at the backbone. The backbone's important, but there's so much demand for load. I mean, a lot of these communities have interest from big load, like data centers. And when you start aggregating up things like electric vehicles, that's big load, right? So we're not even going to be close to being met with a sufficient, if you want to get into really wonky terms, resource adequacy needs by our hydro resource alone. We've got to maximize storage. We've got to deploy demand side management at serious scales. We've got to look almost in all communities for how do we target energy storage coming into this equation. What does it look like to start weaving in significant wind and solar resources? Are we still inefficient? Like, have we used all of the cost-effective demand-side resources? Do we still need to build peaker plants, right? So the dialogue right now, this region and every region across the country, is you've got to be looking at kind of the whole portfolio of solutions and then picking a mix of those things that make sense. It's never going to only be lowest cost, right? Lowest cost resources come with certain attributes. So we're not going to efficiency our way out of the need. Now, is it the most cost-effective resource? Should we use as much of it as possible? Absolutely. But hydro efficiency alone will not get us there, right? So it's got to, I mean, at some point you start looking at, we need some firm resource that looks a whole lot like SMRs, and yeah, they're more expensive. We need some now, right? We don't need it in 5 years or 10 years. We need it now. So no, that'd be my short answer there. I think I got a little bit on a tangent. If you want to loop me back around a little bit.
Well, on a very personal level, I appreciate that answer because one of the things that we've done here on the podcast, whether it's today or some of our past episodes, is featured other technologies, whether that's pump storage or hydrogen or whatever we can get on. And it's like Some people might go, why would you spend time talking about that on a hydropower podcast? But it really speaks to the fact that yeah, we got to look at all of our options, and they're all going to play together and
The
work
region could
together.
get its hand on a couple hundred megawatts or even gigawatts of additional pump storage. That would be hugely valuable right now. Look at peak needs. We're now a dual peaking region in the winter and the summer. If you're not using it really regularly, you're going to have significant value for it in a regional basis next year, right? It's not like these are future states. If you look at NERC maps, I mean, we didn't get the worst scores of our regional resource adequacy, but nobody got good ones. So we need additional generation. We definitely need additional capacity. We need a lot more flexibility, because who knows when something that you're critically relying on goes out, and for whatever reason, maybe you get a heat event, maybe you have a cyber event, maybe it's a wildfire. I mean, the list of things that could happen to disrupt something in a really serious fashion is not short and is only growing. So no, absolutely.
So I know the sands of time are winding down here on the podcast, and I want to be mindful of that. I guess the really the next question that I have is just what's next? For grid forward, for modernization. We've talked about a lot of different things going on today, but looking at kind of the immediate near term and where we're going here. I mean, what's kind of the big focus on right now?
I think what's most immediately next is let's leverage the federal dollars that are being made available. Right, we've made monumental steps to have Congress actually understand that it's important that we invest in our energy systems. Let's show them that they were right in uniquely actually getting together and passing some packages. So I would say that's not only next, that's now, right? So that's the now is everybody who's doing this work, going through the somewhat of the arduous process to leverage those federal dollars and show that it's really important that we put those to good work. I would say potentially these things will be associated to those federal dollars, but potentially a little bit separate and beyond that response. Um, you know, the role of data, data is the new kind of currency of the kind of the time right now, is going to be really fascinating in the energy landscape. I think the dialogue, or maybe even the debate as to who monetizes the data and how, will be an interesting one. I mean, I tend to be, if you're using my data, that's my data. I should get the benefit of you monetizing that. But we're going to move past somewhat of a passive state of looking at our grid and move into an era of more actively managing the system. So these would be things like predictive analytics that I was talking about, where you're putting systems on and they're going to be like, we're reading irregular electrical signals. We think your thing is wrong. And this could be a thing of any, right? This could be a transformer on the energy system. It could be your toaster, right? So you're going to be able to have visibility onto the system to then not only see what's going on, but to have run through this so many times that you know what's about to happen. So the portfolio of data analytical tools on the energy system, as those start to get deployed in a significant fashion, is going to be fascinating. It'll be really interesting to see kind of the largest of the large companies come in and have a role there, the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Googles, and some really exciting earlier stage companies come in and kind of make a name for themselves. A lot of times utilities kind of get the bad rap of being late deployers of advanced solutions. I don't know that that's necessarily the case in this advanced technology scene. I think you'll see some pretty exciting solutions come out on that front. So that might be my one kind of peek into the future on a technology side. I guess I'll also just say, I think the electrification of transportation is inevitable. I think the performance of those vehicles has proven to be far superior to their ICE counterparts, and people are going to fall in love with EVs when they start being delivered in a reasonable time at a reasonable cost, which there are some issues with that right now with global supply chains. But I think that will have a dramatic impact on operators, because you've seen a generally kind of a even as we've built data centers and whatever else has come on the grid, you've seen kind of a steady decline of energy use in general overall, because we've been making our general energy efficiency has been really rocking and rolling pretty well. But electric vehicles are such a large load. They're going to turn that curve around. You're going to see demand growing in a lot of communities that maybe hadn't seen it before. And the way that you run an energy system when you have increasing demand versus declining demand is just a different equation. And so that will definitely be a pretty significant change. Some communities are seeing it today. Some are going to see it in 2 years and 5 years, but it's not that far out. So those would be my couple things as far as what I think is coming around the corner.
It all sounds exciting to me, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go. As we now wind down here, we kind of conclude today's episode, and something we always like to do here on the podcast is bring it back a little bit. We've been talking about a lot of really heavy subjects, things that are really intense, and we like to kind of let our audience get to know the person behind each episode at the end of all of it, and kind of end on that note. So something I like to do is I like to ask all of our guests just for a final closing word to give some general life advice. It doesn't have to be about anything we talked about today. It can just be something on your mind, something you've been living by, or something that struck you recently that you find is just particularly valuable that our listeners might appreciate and enjoy.
Yeah, well, it won't be light for me. I just got back from a memorial yesterday, and I've been to too many of them lately, but it was actually somebody who was only 30, and he was serving the country and had a really intense role doing surveillance, for our overseas adversaries. And so I was with my best buddy who lost his younger brother. And just thinking a little bit, I was on my board call yesterday with somebody who lives in Lahaina, and the town just burnt down yesterday. So I would just say take care of those that are around you. Nothing's guaranteed ahead. So do your best to take care of your loved ones and your community and your people. Nothing's assured. Tomorrow's never guaranteed. So enjoy it while it's here, and take care of your loved ones around you. So yeah, it's been a kind of an interesting few days, and so that's what just immediately comes to mind for me.
No, that resonates a lot for me as well, and without diving too much into it, I have seen a little bit too much of that going on this summer as well, in terms of loss and things like that. And so I think we get sometimes so wrapped up in like work here, for example. You're really focused in on that, and it's like, okay, but we got to make time for ourselves too.
Yeah, I'm unplugging with the family next week. We're going to Central Oregon to spend time together. I'm gonna do what I can for the folks in Hawaii. I love Lahaina. I've been there twice. It's one of the most unbelievable places. So we're gonna, do what we can to help them out. But yeah, for sure, make sure that you get some time to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for making the time today, and I'll let you get out of here, enjoy your Friday, and have a great vacation here coming up soon. And we really appreciate it. And I think our listeners are going to appreciate this one a lot as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Whew, there we go. Never a dull moment here with Dam, and today was no exception. Not that this has anything to do with what you just heard, but just before recording today, our alarm here in the office malfunctioned, which resulted in quite the noise disturbance. Luckily, we got that handled just minutes before recording the episode, and all is well, but boy, what a fun way to start the day, right? Anyhow, as Bryce said, it's never a dull moment over there at Grid Forward either, and they could probably host their own podcast over there, considering the amount of tangents we could have gone off on today. Nonetheless, we covered a lot of ground, and hopefully you learned a thing or two from today's episode. I know some of our friends in the utility world are regular listeners of DAM, so if you want to ensure that Grid Forward continues to go on without a dull moment, you can get in contact with them about some of the incentives and opportunities currently available for those looking to make upgrades in their communities. And, if you're a regular listener, you might want to reach out to your utility just to see what they're up to if they haven't shared any information about maybe some grid modernization efforts they're trying to make, and see if you can participate in some of those programs, even whether it's, the smart thermostats, the smart meters, whatever they've got going on. No matter who you are, though, let me know what you learned from today's episode, what you'd like to hear on future episodes, and what you think of the podcast by contacting us on the brand new nwriverpartners.org website and using our contact form. You can also email us at info@nwriverpartners.org. We'd also appreciate it if you left some 5-star reviews on your favorite listening platform to help us grow the podcast. While you're there, tap the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes, which arrive every other Friday. If you are one of those subscribers, you'd know that today's episode dropped a little late because we actually just recorded this at 9 a.m. Friday morning, but nonetheless, we got it across the finish line and to your ears like we said we would. Last but not least, visit us at NW River Partners on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those social media sites to see what we're up to. And with that, I'm out of here to upload this thing ASAP. So, see ya!